Bigfoot had always been a mystery, but for Chester, it became personal. One night, the creature led him deep into the forest, toward a hidden cave he never knew existed. Inside, Chester saw something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. What he found in that darkness changed his view of Bigfoot forever. Chester was 49 years old. He lived a plain and quiet life near the edge of a forest. He was not the kind of man who cared for busy towns or noisy crowds. Chester preferred the calm of the woods, where every day looked much the same. His routine was steady. In the mornings he would check his small garden, then take long walks along the forest trails. Some days he went fishing at the nearby stream, bringing home enough for supper. He lived alone, but he never complained. He found peace in the silence that others might have called loneliness. Over time, Chester noticed something unusual in the forest. At first it was just signs, large footprints near the creek, broken branches higher than a man could reach. Then one day he caught sight of a figure watching from the trees. It was a Bigfoot, standing still and quiet. Weeks passed, and Chester began leaving bits of food at the edge of the woods. The creature accepted without trouble. Slowly, a strange friendship formed. There were no words, only quiet looks and calm meetings. Trust grew between them, built on patience and respect. One cool evening, Chester was sitting in his chair after supper. The house was quiet. He was about to call it a night when he heard something unusual outside. The sound was heavy and slow, like footsteps pressing into the ground. A few moments later came the crack of a branch breaking near the yard. Chester stood up at once. He knew the woods well, and these noises did not match a deer or any small animal. He opened the door and stepped outside, his eyes moving toward the tree line. There, just beyond the yard, stood the same Bigfoot he had come to know over the past months. The tall figure was partly hidden in the shadows, but there was no mistake about it. It was watching Chester, yet not in the calm, steady way he was used to. This time the creature seemed restless. Its shoulders moved as if it were breathing harder than normal. It shifted its weight from one leg to the other, and its head turned toward the dark forest behind it, then back again to Chester. Chester felt a chill. For the first time, he sensed unease from the Bigfoot. Something was wrong. He stood still, waiting, his eyes locked on the creature's nervous stance. Chester had no idea what danger was near, but he knew this was not a casual visit. The Bigfoot's anxious look carried meaning something was happening in the forest that neither of them could ignore. The Bigfoot did not act in its usual calm way. Normally, when it came near Chester's yard, it stood still or watched quietly before leaving again. But tonight was different. The creature paced back and forth just beyond the edge of the yard, its large feet pressed into the soil, leaving deep marks with every step. It stopped, looked toward the woods, then back at Chester. A low sound came from its throat, more like a hum than a growl. Chester stayed silent, watching. He could see the creature's unease. Its arms moved in sharp motions, pointing toward the trees and then sweeping back toward him. At first, Chester was unsure, but after a few moments, he realized the Bigfoot was not simply restless. It was trying to tell him something. The motions grew clearer. The Bigfoot wanted him to follow. Its hand, large and rough, lifted and waved toward the forest. Then it stepped back, waiting for Chester to respond. Chester felt his heart beat faster. He understood that this was no ordinary visit. The Bigfoot had come with purpose, and the message was urgent. No words were spoken. None were needed. Chester knew enough to trust the signs before him. He took a slow step forward, nodding once as if to say, "I understand." The Bigfoot turned, ready to lead the way. Chester followed as the Bigfoot moved steadily into the forest. Its steps were long and sure, while Chester had to keep a careful pace to avoid stumbling. The ground was uneven, covered in roots and fallen branches that reached across the trail like traps. The deeper they went, the quieter the forest became. Chester noticed the stillness first. No birds called from the trees. No insects buzzed. Even the usual rustle of small animals in the brush was gone. The air felt heavy, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. Chester knew these woods well, yet this silence unsettled him. The Bigfoot never turned back but kept moving forward with purpose. Its tall frame pushed easily through thick undergrowth. Chester, though slower, stayed close. He felt that leaving too much space between them would be a mistake. Whatever waited ahead, the creature clearly wanted him there. The path twisted through parts of the forest Chester had never seen. He thought he knew every trail near his cabin, but this one was different, wild, hidden, and untouched. The ground sloped downward, the air cooling with every step. At last, they reached a rocky rise. Vines and moss hung over a dark opening in the stone. The entrance was narrow and easy to miss, almost swallowed by the hillside. Chester stopped and stared. It was a cave, hidden in plain sight. The Bigfoot stepped aside and looked at him, waiting. Chester understood. He was meant to go inside. Chester stepped carefully into the cave. The air inside was cool and damp, filled with the smell of earth and moss. His eyes took time to adjust to the dim light. What he saw made him stop in his tracks. All around him were Bigfoots, not one or two, but an entire tribe. Some were taller than any man, their fur dark and heavy. Others were smaller, likely young ones staying close to the larger figures. They stood in silence, their wide eyes fixed on Chester. None moved forward, none showed anger. They only watched. The sight struck him hard. He had always thought of Bigfoot as a single creature, a mystery glimpsed now and then in the woods. But here was proof of much more. They were a people, gathered together like a hidden family. At the center of the gathering lay a massive figure. It was larger than any of the others, its fur streaked with gray. The creature lay stretched on the stone floor, breathing in slow, shallow pulls. Its eyes were half closed, its chest rising and falling with effort. Chester saw at once that this was their leader, ancient and near the end of life. The Bigfoot, who had led Chester here, stepped close to the fallen one. Then it turned to Chester, its eyes filled with urgency. In that moment, Chester understood. He had not been brought here by chance. He had been chosen, guided to this hidden place for a purpose. The tribe needed him. Their leader was dying, and somehow they believed Chester could help. The weight of it settled on him. Alone in a cave, surrounded by eyes, he realized his life had changed forever. The cave was silent, except for the faint, labored breathing of the great leader lying on the stone floor. Around him, the tribe stood still, their massive bodies casting shadows against the rock walls. No one moved toward Chester with threat or anger. Instead, they gave soft, low sounds, deep hums that echoed faintly in the cavern. One by one, a few of them raised their arms, motioning gently toward the fallen leader. Their hands, large and rough, opened in a gesture that needed no words. Chester could feel their plea without being told. He understood. They wanted him to help. The thought filled him with both fear and weight. Chester was no doctor, no trained healer. But he knew basic care, and he had a small set of supplies back at his cabin: bandages, herbs, and medicines he kept for emergencies. Maybe it would be enough. He glanced once more at the leader. The ancient creature's breathing was shallow, each pull of air weaker than the last. Chester could see the desperation in the eyes of the tribe. They were asking him to act, not to turn away. The responsibility pressed heavy on his chest. These creatures, hidden from the world, were trusting him. If he failed, their leader would die. If he succeeded, he might save more than just one life. He might save their entire way of being. Chester nodded slowly. The Bigfoot who had first brought him here gave a low sound, almost like relief. Without wasting another moment, Chester turned and hurried out of the cave. His feet carried him quickly over the rough path. His mind was fixed on one thought. He had to reach his cabin, gather what he could, and return before it was too late. Chester returned to the cave, carrying all he could manage. In his pack were blankets, jars of clean water, dried food, and a few herbs he had gathered from the forest. His hands shook slightly as he stepped back into the dark cavern, but the tribe parted to let him through. Their silence showed both respect and hope. He moved to the side of the fallen leader. The great creature's breathing was still weak, sweat glistening on its brow beneath the heavy fur. Chester knelt and spread a blanket across the stone floor, then carefully covered the giant frame with another. He spoke no words, but his hands worked steady. From a small cup, he lifted water to the Bigfoot's lips. At first, the elder could take only a sip, but slowly it swallowed, each drop giving a little strength. Chester crushed herbs between his palms, mixing them into the water to ease the breathing. Then he offered tiny bites of dried food, careful not to overwhelm the weakened body. The days that followed became routine. Each morning, Chester returned with more supplies: roots, bandages, tools from his cabin. He cleaned the wounds he found, wiped away sweat, and kept the leader warm through the long nights. The tribe stood close, always watching. At first, their eyes were sharp with caution, but as they saw his care, their unease softened. No one growled or blocked his path anymore. Instead, they gave space, allowing him to move freely. Chester knew he had earned their trust. He was no longer just a visitor in their hidden world. He was a man they had accepted, chosen to help them in their darkest moment. The days in the cave were heavy with tension. Chester never knew what to expect when he entered. Some mornings the elder Bigfoot seemed stronger, its eyes opening wider, its breathing steady. Other times it appeared near the end, slipping into long silences, its chest barely rising. Each shift between weakness and recovery weighed on Chester like a stone. He kept his work steady. He changed the damp blankets, gave sips of water, and placed herbs against the creature's lips. He offered food in small amounts, never forcing, always patient. He wiped sweat from the fur, whispering words he knew the Bigfoot would not understand but spoke them anyway. The tribe gathered around each time. They never interfered. They only stood in silence, their dark shapes filling the cave. Chester could feel their eyes on him. Their hope, their fear, and their trust pressed on him with every move he made. They were waiting, watching for signs of life in their leader. Through these long hours, something changed in Chester. He no longer felt like an outsider stumbling into a hidden world. The bond with the creatures grew stronger, as if he had been pulled into their circle. His presence was no longer questioned. He was one of them, a man chosen for a task greater than himself. And slowly, the signs of recovery came. The elder's breaths deepened. Its hand, once limp, began to twitch with strength. Its eyes opened longer, focusing on Chester, then closing again with less struggle. The tribe noticed, and though they made no loud sound, a quiet sense of relief filled the cave. Chester knew the fight was not over, but hope was no longer distant. Days passed, and the change in the elder Bigfoot became clear. What once seemed like a slow march toward death now turned into a climb back to life. The great creature's breathing grew stronger, no longer shallow and strained. With effort, it pushed itself up from the stone floor, resting against the cave wall. Chester steadied it with his hands, guiding gently. The leader gave a low sound, deep and steady, a sign of strength returning. Soon, with more days of rest and care, the elder could sit without help. Then came the moment when it struggled to stand. The tribe watched in silence as Chester placed a hand beneath the leader's arm and lifted. Shaking but determined, the elder rose to its feet. The sight filled the cave with quiet power. No cheers, no cries, just a stillness that carried respect. The tribe's gratitude came in gestures. Several of them lowered their heads toward Chester, a silent bow that spoke louder than words. Others reached out hands, not to touch him but to hold them near, as if marking him as one of their own. The Bigfoot, who had first guided him to the cave, stepped closer and placed a hand over its chest, then pointed at Chester. The meaning was plain. Chester felt humbled. He was only a man, yet these hidden beings had trusted him with their greatest secret and their most fragile moment. He knew he had been allowed to cross a boundary no other human had been given. The bond was unbreakable. Whatever happened in the world beyond the forest, Chester and the tribe would remain tied together by this act of trust and survival. In time, the tribe faded back into the wilderness. One by one, the Bigfoots left the cave, vanishing into the deep forest. There was no farewell in words, only soft looks and slow gestures as they disappeared into the trees. Chester stood alone, knowing he might never see them again. Weeks later, he returned to the cave. The moss-covered entrance looked the same, but inside there was nothing. The silence was heavy, and the floor bare, as though the tribe had never been there at all. Without the presence of the great creatures, it was just another cave in the woods. Chester stood quietly in the dim light, remembering the nights he had spent tending to the leader, the long hours of uncertainty, and the moment when strength had returned. He thought of the tribe lowering their heads in thanks, and the bond that had formed in that hidden world. He understood then why the Bigfoot had guided him. It was not by accident. They had chosen him to save their leader, and in doing so, he had been given a rare honor few men could ever imagine. Chester carried the memory with him, holding it close. He never told it often, sharing it only once in his life, and even then, in simple words. The story was not meant to prove anything. It was meant to remind him of the trust he had earned and the life he had touched.